Alex had always trusted his instincts. They were what kept him ahead in life, what helped him navigate tricky situations at work, and what made him good at reading people. But tonight, his instincts were screaming at him, and he couldn't ignore them. It started with something small, a glance, a flicker of movement. He had walked into their bedroom earlier than expected, fresh out of the shower, towel draped over his shoulder, when he caught sight of Kadi hastily lowering her phone. It wasn't just the motion itself, it was the way she did it, too fast, too deliberate, as if whatever she had been looking at wasn't meant for his eyes. She forced a smile, brushing a strand of her dark curls behind her ear. "You scared me," she laughed lightly. "Didn't hear you come in." Alex didn't say anything at first, just watched as she flipped her phone over, screen down, onto the nightstand. "What were you looking at?" His tone was casual, but he saw her shoulders tense for just a fraction of a second. "Just a stupid video," she said with a wave of her hand. "One of those prank compilations." He nodded slowly. She was lying. He knew it. Later that night, as Kati lay beside him, sound asleep, Alex sat in the dim glow of his laptop, the unease in his chest tightening into something heavier. He had spent the last 2 years with this woman. She was beautiful, charming, the kind of person who could light up a room with just a smile. And yet, right now, she felt like a stranger. His fingers drummed lightly on the desk as he glanced toward the nightstand where her phone lay, locked. But Alex knew something Kati had forgotten. She had an old backup phone, one she hadn't used in months, maybe even years. And, if she had been careless enough to leave it lying around, there was a good chance some of her messages had been synced. He found it buried in a drawer under a pile of scarves and tangled charger cords. The screen was cracked at the corner, the battery low. He plugged it in, heart hammering as the screen flickered to life. The messages were still there, and they told him everything. Kati hadn't just been talking to her ex. She had never stopped. Months and months of conversations, late-night confessions, plans to meet up, some messages deleted, but Alex knew how to recover those too. As he scrolled, his stomach turned. "I miss you. He doesn't excite me like you do. I wish I could see you right now." A pit formed in his stomach, hot and bitter. His fingers tightened around the phone. She had played him, and she thought he wouldn't find out. Alex exhaled, his jaw clenching. If she wanted to play games, fine, but he was going to be the one to finish them. Alex sat in the dark, the dim glow of the phone screen casting eerie shadows across his face. His pulse was steady, his breathing controlled, but his mind was a storm. The messages told a story he had never been meant to see. Kadi had been weaving a web of deceit right under his nose, smiling sweetly, kissing him goodnight, all while whispering, "I miss you," to another man. Justin. The name stared back at him, taunting him from the screen. Her ex, the one she always claimed was nothing more than a memory, just someone from the past, someone she had long since moved on from. Bullshit. Alex scrolled further, his fingers tightening around the device. They had talked about meeting up. They had reminisced about old times. "He doesn't excite me like you do," she had written, and that one sentence burned itself into his brain. He set the phone down on the desk and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. There was no immediate burst of anger, no shouting, no blind rage. That wasn't his style. Alex had never been one to react emotionally. He was a man of strategy. And right now he was laying out the first moves in a game Kadi didn't even know she was playing. He needed proof, hard, undeniable proof, something that couldn't be explained away by weak excuses or fake tears. The old phone had given him plenty, but he wanted more. A quick search led him to an old cloud backup Kadi had forgotten to disconnect. Jackpot. Texts, voice messages, and even a few deleted photos started trickling in. The worst part, she didn't even bother to change her approach. The same sweet words she once used on Alex she was feeding to Justin. "You always know how to make me feel special." Alex let out a short, humorless laugh. She had been so confident, so sure that he would never suspect a thing, but she underestimated him. He would make sure she never made that mistake again. The idea took shape slowly, piece by piece, until it was clear in his mind. He wouldn't just confront her. No, that would be too easy, too predictable. He was going to destroy the perfect little image she had so carefully built, and he knew exactly where to do it. Kati's birthday was in 3 days. Her family was planning a lavish gathering at her parents' estate, an event filled with laughter, wine, and perfectly curated social media moments. It was supposed to be a day of celebration. Now, it would be the scene of her downfall. Alex spent the next 2 nights preparing. He extracted the most damning conversations and organized them neatly. He compiled screenshots, selected voice notes, and even retrieved an old photo of Katy and Justin that had been erased months ago. He wanted everything lined up perfectly. Then he did something bold. He added himself to her family's group chat. It was a simple move, one that seemed innocent on the surface. Katy's mom had sent him an invite a while back, probably assuming he'd just use it to discuss logistics. But Alex had other plans. At exactly the right moment, when the candles were lit, when Katy was surrounded by the people who adored her, when she had no way to escape, he would deliver the final blow. He could already picture it, the gasps, the stunned silence, the way Katy's face would drain of color as her world crumbled around her. She had played him for a fool. Now it was his turn to play. Alex moved through the next day like a ghost, his mind running through every possible scenario. He had a plan, but execution was everything. Timing, precision, these were the details that mattered now. Katy was oblivious. She hummed to herself as she got ready for work that morning, kissing Alex on the cheek before heading out the door. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air long after she was gone, mixing with the bitter aroma of Alex's untouched coffee. She still had no idea. That thought alone fueled him, kept his anger cold and controlled. If she had even the slightest suspicion, she would have already started weaving a new lie. But she didn't suspect a thing. That was the beauty of it. She believed she was still in control. By noon, Alex had everything he needed. He backed up all the messages, the photos, the voice recordings. He created a folder on his phone, carefully labeled something inconspicuous, and ensured that everything was accessible at a moment's notice. But the reveal itself, it had to be perfect, a spectacle, something unforgettable. He decided to visit Katy's parents' estate that evening under the guise of helping with party preparations. They adored him, always had. Even Katy's grandmother, a sharp-eyed woman who rarely gave out her approval, had a soft spot for him. "Ah, Alex, always so dependable," her mother beamed as he stepped into the kitchen. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon filled the air. Her famous homemade birthday cake was cooling on the counter. Katy's father clapped him on the back, already sipping from a glass of whiskey. "Glad to see you, son. Thought I'd have to hang the decorations alone." Alex forced a chuckle, slipping effortlessly into his usual role. It was almost amusing how easily he could pretend, how normal he could act, despite knowing the chaos he was about to unleash. As they strung up fairy lights in the backyard, he subtly worked the conversation toward Katy. "She's been a bit stressed lately," he said, watching her father's reaction. He sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Yeah, she mentioned something about work. You know how she is. Always juggling 1,000 things at once." Alex nodded, choosing his words carefully. "I just want her to be happy. I hope she knows how much we all care about her." Her father gave him a reassuring smile, squeezing his shoulder. "You're a good man, Alex. She's lucky to have you." Lucky. If only he knew. The decorations were finished by the time the sun dipped below the horizon. The estate looked stunning. Warm lights draped across the patio, tables elegantly set, candles flickering in the breeze. Everything was perfect. By the time Alex got home, Katy was already there, excitedly scrolling through her phone, probably finalizing details for her big day. "Mom said you were over," she said, glancing up at him. "That was sweet of you. You didn't have to help." He smiled, stepping toward her. "Of course I did. Big night after all." She grinned, standing on her toes to kiss him. It took everything in him not to recoil. He played along, he had to. The next day was a blur. Alex busied himself with work, his mind laser-focused on the moment that awaited him. By the time evening arrived, he was more than ready. The party was in full swing when he arrived, the estate buzzing with laughter and music. Kadi was the center of attention, dazzling in a form-fitting red dress, her dark curls cascading over her shoulders. She glowed under the string lights, playing the role of the beloved daughter, the perfect girlfriend. Alex observed her from a distance, drink in hand, waiting. Timing was everything. As the evening progressed, Katie's family gathered around the massive dining table, raising their glasses in her honor. Her mother placed the homemade cake in front of her, candles flickering, her father beginning a heartfelt toast. This was it. Alex reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. With a few taps, he attached the folder to a message. The family group chat was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, phones buzzed around the table. A confused murmur spread through the guests. Kadi's mother frowned, lowering her glass to check her phone. Her father squinted at his screen, his expression darkening. Kadi laughed, oblivious. "What's going on?" Her grandmother, who rarely used her phone, was the first to speak. "Kati, dear, what is this?" She turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" Then the blood drained from her face. She grabbed her phone, unlocking it with trembling fingers. The moment she saw the messages, the pictures, the proof of her betrayal laid out for everyone to see, her breath hitched. Gasps filled the air, conversations halted. Her father stood, his face red with anger. "Kadi, what the hell is this?" I can explain," she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. Her mother shook her head, eyes glistening. "You've been cheating on Alex?" Kadi's lips parted, but no words came out. The room felt heavy, suffocating. Her grandmother's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I never trusted her." Kati's eyes darted to Alex, her expression pleading, but he simply smiled, taking a slow sip of his drink. She had played him. Now she was the fool. Silence. Silence settled over the room like a thick fog, pressing in on Kati from all sides. The weight of a dozen stunned stares pinned her in place. The warmth of candlelight and celebration had been replaced by something cold, something unspoken yet heavy in the air. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, her eyes darting over the damning messages displayed on the screen. Conversations she thought were private, now exposed to her family, to Alex, to everyone. Her mother was the first to react, covering her mouth with a shaking hand, eyes wide and glistening. Katie had always been her father's pride, the daughter who could do no wrong, but now he looked at her like she was a stranger. "Kati," his voice was low, dangerous. "Is this a joke?" She forced out a breath, her mind scrambling for something, anything that could fix this. But how do you explain away the truth? She swallowed hard, voice breaking. "It's not what it looks like." Alex chuckled, slow and deliberate, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Oh, then by all means, Kati, explain it to us." She turned to him, her wide, pleading eyes searching his face for mercy. He had to be furious, humiliated. Maybe, just maybe, if she could get him alone, she could twist this, turn it into something salvageable. "Can we talk?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alex tilted his head, pretending to consider. Then, with a sharp, mocking smile, he answered, "We're already talking." A small, choked noise left her throat. She could feel her parents watching, could sense the disappointment radiating off of them like heat. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her mother turned to Alex, still reeling. "Alex, sweetheart, how long have you known?" "Oh, just a few days," he said, his voice light, almost amused. "But don't worry, I did my research before making a scene. I wouldn't want to ruin Kadi's perfect little reputation over a misunderstanding." Her grandmother let out a dry laugh. "Misunderstanding? The girl's been sleeping around behind his back." She shook her head, picking up her fork again, as if the scandal unfolding before her was nothing more than mild entertainment. "Knew she was too sweet to be real." Kadi's stomach twisted painfully. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. "Mom, Dad, please," she tried again, reaching toward them. Her father recoiled, his expression darkening. "How could you do this?" His voice, usually steady and full of warmth, cracked under the weight of betrayal. Cotty turned back to Alex, desperation creeping into her voice. It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was a mistake. I was confused. Alex raised an eyebrow. Confused? She nodded quickly, trying to latch on to anything that might soften him. Yes, it's just, I've been overwhelmed and Justin was just there and I... So overwhelmed you kept talking to him for months? Alex interrupted smoothly. Kept sending messages, kept sneaking around. He leaned forward, his voice dropping just slightly. Tell me, Kadi, at what point were you planning to stop being confused? Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. That was the moment she realized there was no coming back from this. Her father pushed back his chair, standing up so suddenly it scraped against the floor. Enough, he snapped. His piercing glare landed on Kadi, but it wasn't just anger in his expression. It was disappointment, and that hurt worse. I didn't raise you to be this kind of person. She could feel her mother's gaze boring into her, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. The perfect family picture Kadi had spent years maintaining was shattering around her. Peace. Alex set his drink down with a soft clink. Well, he said, standing up and brushing non-existent dust from his shirt. I think that about does it for me. Kadi's panic skyrocketed. No, he couldn't just leave. If he left now, he'd never forgive her. Alex, wait. He stopped, turning to face her. For what? She took a step toward him, desperation evident in every move. We can fix this. I know I messed up, but we can work through it. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Fix this? He glanced at her phone, still clutched in her hands. You think this is something a simple, I'm sorry, will fix? Kati's breath hitched. Let me be clear, Alex said, voice calm, collected. I'm not angry. I'm not heartbroken. I'm not even surprised. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just for her. I'm just done. The finality in his tone sent a chill down her spine. Then, just as smoothly as he had set everything in motion, Alex turned and walked toward the door. Kati stood frozen, her world crumbling as she watched him go. Her father exhaled sharply and ran a hand over his face. Go home, Kati. We'll talk about this later. That was the worst part, not the scandal, not the shame, her own family turning away from her. Her mother picked up a knife and began cutting into the birthday cake. Her grandmother gestured toward Alex's empty chair. Should we save a slice for him? Her father shook his head, his voice low and tired. No, he's not coming back. And with that, the party continued, quieter, colder. Kati had lost everything. Kati sat in her car outside her parents' house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The party had gone on without her. Even as she had stumbled out onto the driveway, gasping for air, she could still hear the quiet murmur of conversation inside, the clinking of forks against plates, the sound of life moving on. Without her, she wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there, her phone buzzing uselessly on the seat beside her. She hadn't dared to look at it. The group chat was probably still exploding with shock and gossip. Her friends, the ones who had laughed with her just hours ago, were now likely dissecting every part of her downfall. The worst part was knowing Alex wouldn't be answering any of her calls. She finally forced herself to start the engine, the rumble breaking the fragile silence of the night. She drove through the streets on autopilot, barely aware of the turns she was making. When she pulled up to her apartment building, she hesitated before getting out. For the first time, the place felt empty. Alex's shoes weren't by the door, his jacket wasn't slung over the chair, his presence, something she had always taken for granted, was already fading. She sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the dark television screen in front of her. Her mind kept replaying the moment he had walked away. No shouting, no slamming doors, just cold finality. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She had been careless, yes. She had enjoyed the thrill of keeping something just out of reach, of balancing two worlds, but she had always assumed she had control over it. Justin had been an escape, a stupid indulgence. She never thought it would cost her everything. A sharp knock at the door jolted her upright. Her heart lurched. For a second, just a brief, foolish second, she let herself hope. Alex? But when she opened the door, it was her mother. She stood there, wrapped in her coat, looking older than Caddy had ever seen her. "Mom, let me in," her mother said softly. Kati stepped aside, biting her lip. The last thing she wanted was another lecture, but the fact that her mother had come at all meant something, didn't it? Her mother walked in slowly, looking around the apartment, as if seeing it for the first time. Or maybe seeing it differently now. Finally, she turned to Kati with a sigh. "Your father didn't want me to come." Kati swallowed hard. "Are you here to tell me how disappointed you are?" Her mother shook her head. "I think you already know." That hurt more than anything. Kati sat down, rubbing her arms. "I messed up," she whispered. Her mother didn't argue. Instead, she sat beside her, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Do you love him?" Kitty blinked. "What?" "Alex," her mother clarified. "Do you love him?" The answer should have been simple, but suddenly Kati wasn't sure what to say. I I did," she admitted, voice cracking. "I still do." Her mother sighed again, looking at her with something almost like pity. "Then why did you throw him away?" Kati let out a shaky breath. "I don't know." But that wasn't true, was it? She had liked the attention, the validation. She had liked knowing that Justin still wanted her, even when she had something as good as Alex. Her mother reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind Kati's ear like she used to when Kati was a child. "You made a choice," she said gently, "and now you have to live with it." Kati felt the sting of tears in her eyes. "I don't want to." Her mother squeezed her hand. "That's not how life works." Silence stretched between them. Finally, her mother stood, smoothing down her coat. "Take care of yourself, Kati." She hesitated at the door. Then, with a final sad smile, she was gone. Kati sat there long after the door closed, staring at nothing, the weight of everything pressing down on her. For the first time in her life, she realized there were no do-overs, no second chances. She had lost Alex, and he wasn't coming back.